So I wasn't sure what to call this lesson, but I guess two different approaches to how to play over There Will Never Be Another You, or something like that. We're gonna look at a basic idea on how to solo over this tune, and then I'll show you a more way that you can break away from that idea and into a more modern approach. So it was the whole idea for this lesson was born out of one of my students asked, how do you play over the last bar or the last 4 bars of the tune, or the last chord progression, which is kind of like this very chordy, right? Like A minor 7 flat 5 to D7 to E flat, A flat, G, C. And my response would be, well, you have to play chord tones, but then I thought about like no, well, so I started thinking about that. You have to know how to play chord tones, but you don't have to play chord tones. That's kind of the paradox. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So the idea is what I've said before many times. You need to be able to play chord tones over a standard like this, or a tune like this, where you have a whole bunch of chords moving, but it's possible to just kind of play an E flat, but you need to be able to outline the harmony, and the way to do that is to play chord tones. So I'll show you four different ways that you can play chord tones. So the first would be just play chord tones, just play the 4 notes of the arpeggio, right? So I'm just playing the notes of the chord, so I'll do it with the backing track. And then of course you need to be able to change it around, so maybe the opposite direction. I find that when I should tell students to do that, most jazz beginners can do what I just did, more or less, and you absolutely need to be able to do that. It's very basic, right? But as soon as I tell them play from the highest note to the lowest instead just descending, they run into problems. And I have made lessons about this in the past, where I talk about how you can make music from all of this. But if you don't know how to do this, it's you have a lot of work to do, okay? And at the end there you can hear so it sounds kind of stupid when you play it like that, but you need to be able to do that so that you know what notes, how they go by, right? Because it's not possible to play scales if you're playing. There's no time to play Ionian, Mixo, Dorian, altered, right? And so you could create lines that work over those chords, right? But you definitely need, in my opinion, to be able to play chord tones. So the next thing you can do is play on the more coltrane pattern type chord tones. We play like 1, 2, 3, 5 kind of chord tones instead of. So it especially works for fast tempos. So for major chords 1, 2, 3, 5, and for minor chords 1, 3, or flat 3, 4, 5. So again, I've talked about this in previous lessons, but I'll show you what it sounds like if I do that. Just switching up different chord tones. Right, sorry. So yeah, so that's the second way you can play chord tones. The third is to just play the guide tones, the third and the seventh. If I do that without a backing track, you can hopefully hear the chords go by. Then you can do all the kind of surround stuff, right? That kind of boppy stuff. So you want to be able to do this because this is how you kind of know where the important notes are, the notes that define kind of the changes. So if I'm playing in my E flat, I know there's a G coming up. I know that note is coming up there. So I can think kind of I'm in E flat, but I'm aware of those notes that kind of are shaping the song, I guess. And another thing that I notice with more beginner improvisers is that you ask them, do you know the scales? Like, yeah, Ionian, they know the modes, the altered scales and all that stuff. But as soon as they start playing, after a while, they're just kind of playing stuff with no relation to the song, and you're like, what's going on? And you understand, or you realize that they don't know what chord they're on. So this kind of practicing forces you to know exactly what chord you're playing over at all the time. And you need to know that, because you can't, how are you supposed to be able to play the changes if you don't know what chord you're on? And I remember the first time I heard, I was in, it's not even college, I was in like grade school, and we had in some kind of jazz program. And there was a sax player who was just practicing by himself, and he was playing all of me, but he was just soloing. And I remember, I was like, how can I hear you're playing over all of me, right? And he's like, yeah, but why can't I hear that? And he said, well, because I'm playing the chord tones. It's like, oh, so that's what's outlining the harmony. But you also, once you master that, and I've said this before as well, once you master that technique of outlining the harmony to a certain degree or level, you can always take it further, right? But once you master it to some degree, you're gonna find it frustrating that it's not really satisfying when you're actually playing. If that's what's all you're doing is outlining the chords, that's not interesting. So I'll get to that. There's one more way of playing chord tones, and now you're thinking, what? There is another way to play chord tones? Yes, bob scales, because bob scales are chord tones. If you think about it, like it's a chord tone, passing note, chord tone, passing note, etc. So I'll play just very basic bob scales, and I've covered this so many times before, so I'm not gonna get into it too much, but I'll just show you so what it sounds like playing bob scales over this tune. Here we go. Okay, so that was bob scales. Now, let's say you can't do any of this, what I just showed you. You need to work on that till you feel somewhat comfortable playing bob scales and chord tones pretty effortlessly over this tune at a reasonable tempo. Now let's say that you can do all that, and it's frustrating, like how, because when you go to the jam or the gig and you play with more seasoned player or more advanced players, you know, the last chords, for example, you have your chord tones under your fingers, but the piano player is just like playing all this kind of, you know, weird stuff, and the bass player is just like, there's nothing to do with those chords. You need to be able to respond to that as well, and you can't be like, wait a minute, I'm playing my chord tones here and I'm playing my bob scales. They're just gonna be like, well, you know. So you need to prepare for that also. But then you're thinking, how can I get like that? How do I get that good? The road to that kind of level of performance, I think, is through learning the basics so well that you get bored with it and you automatically start looking for the next level, right? So I'll show you a more modern approach to this tune, I guess. Then we're gonna remove a lot of the chords and make it more like a pedal kind of tune. So let me remove. What happens a lot of times when you play is that the bass player starts pedaling. The root or the fifth. So you can think of it like that, almost like more of a modal. You make the chords longer and you remove a lot of the chords that we don't really need. So I guess that would be what some people call harmonic generalization. So I'll do that and I'll play as if I'm pedaling, kind of. I'll just record a little looper and I think you'll see what I mean. Okay, I even played a little at the end there, an E triad over the B flat, because just to create a more altered modern sound. The E triad is, you can find the E major triad within the B flat altered scale. Right? or the symmetrical diminished. It's a very common thing to play E triad over B flat when it's dominant. So this might seem like a weird thing, but if I play the melody over this, it sounds pretty straightforward. Already it opens, it suggests a different kind of approach. It gives me more freedom to experiment with different sounds and different concepts. It opens up the harmony. It enables, or the soloist gets more freedom, right? Another important thing to understand is that the last line of the tune, the dominant at the end, where we had all those chords, that's the strongest point of the tune where it leads back to the top. So the dominant there, you can create all sorts of tension. That's where you want to play all your altered and crazy stuff. Some different approaches could be then triad pairings, or triad coupling, or hexatonics. So I have some PDFs for you, as usual. They're on my Patreon page, with combinations of hexatonics or two triads. So this is nothing new. This is there are many books about this. Many players have talked about this and used this concept all the time. So if I take, for the first chord, E flat major triad and F triad, I can play that over that chord. Gives you a completely different sound, completely different approach, different feel. And then for the G, I'm going to think of that as a D flat 7. So I'm going to think of the tritone. So by doing that, if you know your theory, you will know that that creates a G altered. The D flat dominance is the same as G altered. So D flat major triad to an E flat augmented triad. It's a D flat major and an E flat augmented. Two triads that create a scale that you can find those notes in the G altered. That it's a completely different approach than just playing the G altered scale. It's a sound. So that's the rule of thumb. For the dominant chords, I'm going to use a major triad and an augmented triad. And then for the altered dominant, I'm going to think of that dominant as its tritone sub and use its major and augmented triad. And for the major chords, two major triads, and for the minor chords, two major triads as well. So I'll do that just so that you can hear it first. I'll just play the triads. F, G augmented, E. And here, E triad, F sharp augmented. Try to make music. Right, so it's not that strange. It's pretty straightforward. So the next thing you could do is pentatonics, also a more modern sound. Like they didn't do that back in the day when they played bebop. This whole thing, this came later. But it's still pretty kindergarten stuff compared to what players like these days, like Ben Bonder and I don't know, Gilad Hexelman, those guys, they eat this stuff for breakfast, right? It's nothing. So pentatonics, well, you can play an E flat major pentatonic for that chord, and for the G, I'll play a D flat dominant pentatonic instead of it's. Or you can think of that as an A flat minor 6 pentatonics. If you're interested in this stuff, I'll recommend Jerry Bergonzi book Pentatonics. I think it's the best book that I've seen anyway on this topic. C minor, E flat major pentatonic, same thing. The E flat dominant chord, I'll play E flat dominant. Then I said A flat major pentatonic, but as I started practicing this, I realized that I prefer the E flat there as well, actually. And then at the end there, when there's a B flat pedal, I'll play an E dominant, which creates the notes the flat 5, the flat 13, flat 7, flat 9, and the sharp 9. So it sounds like this. A flat, F dominant, E dominant, E flat. I prefer E flat there. E. So I'll make some patterns for you. I messed up there. So the idea is that the difficult thing here is to connect them in a nice way, so it doesn't sound like you're just playing a pattern, then it's moving it. You need to be able to kind of in a smooth way connect the pentatonic scales. That's the trick when you're doing this kind of stuff, I think. So now I'll do these two approaches, the hexatonics and the pentatonics, but I'll make a backing track that in the style I was playing before, more of a that you would usually play, right? So let's say you're two guitar players jamming, you would probably play something like so now triad. Okay, so I got a little bit lost there. It was kind of hard to do actually. Again, that's there too. It's the trick is to be able to connect them. And if you, let's say, you're on a journey, and the next chord is coming up, you want to be able to switch to, so that you continue with the same shape in the same direction without lose. Even though that's the new chord is trickier than the previous, because it's pretty easy to do F to E flat, but then the D flat to the E flat augmented might mess you up, right? Like, wait, where is the next? So that's the kind of stuff this forces you to work on that, right? So I hope you see my point there. So pentatonics, I'll do the same thing. First I'll show you a little bit just basic pentatonics, and then I'll try to be more experimental with it. Here's F, E, Alright, so the tempo there was a little bit too fast for me to play double time, I noticed. But yeah, that was a very long lesson, sorry about that. But I hope you got something out of it, and I shall see you next time.